going south to observe the solar eclipse in April to drop into Perth Observatory to take a look at that institution while I was making some extra time in that city. The Perth Observatory, like many of the observatories in the old British Empire, are a result of Britain's need to keep its navy in place and have a way of making sure that they knew where they were. So observatories were built at many of the colonies in order to help them with calibrating their clocks when they came into port. And Perth was no exception. While Sydney had already managed to get their observatory in the 1850s, it took until the 1890s for the colony of Western Australia to authorize the building of the observatory. And construction began on Mount Eliza in 1896 and was finished in 1900. And this photograph from the Perth Observatory website is of the government astronomers' residence on Mount Eliza. The principal task at the time was timekeeping, but also the government astronomer was charged with collecting meteorological data and then later seismic data. And it wasn't until well into the 1900s that the observatory began to also do independent research. All the time, it was a government institution under the colonial and then later the state government of Western Australia. Eventually, the site at Mount Eliza became untenable because of light pollution from the city below the observatory site, and it was moved about 23 kilometers to the east to Bickley in 1966, where it continues today. And active research at the observatory ended in 2012, when the observatory was transferred to the Department of Parks and Wildlife from Government Services. During that period, from roughly 1900 to 1966, the observatory was quite productive. This listing is from their website, and there are a number of things that they managed to do over the years. Similar to the David Dunlap Observatory, members of their staff participated in eclipse expeditions to confirm Einstein's theory of relativity by doing photographs during and before a solar eclipse to check for displacement of solar images near the sun's limb. They were also involved with doing a lot of cataloging of the stars in the Southern Hemisphere, publishing the meridian catalogs periodically throughout the time of operation. They participated in the International Planetary Program in 1968 with the Lowell Observatory, which netted them a 24-inch telescope. And they also had an astrograph that they had purchased when the observatory was commissioned to do a planetary photographic archive as well, and a number of other things that they also managed to do. The amazing thing about this, when I look back into the records of the Perth Observatory, is that this was all done by 3 people, including maintenance of the observatory. So they were busy. They also did outreach. There's very little mentioned about outreach activities at the Mount Eliza site, although there is this statement from the 3rd government astronomer about the sky conditions at Mount Eliza. And I'd like you to particularly look at the last 3 lines of that passage, where he talks about the conditions and how they could not possibly adversely affect observing conditions on the site. Of course, you know, this is typical. And by 1966, the light pollution was so bad that they ended up having to move. In relative terms, thanks to Google Maps, here's the two locations. You'll note that the Mount Eliza site is really nice because it overlooks the port of Fremantle, which is a saltwater port. This is where all the ships came in from India, and today it's still a very busy container port. It's the only port on the west coast of Australia, and it's also where all the cruise ships come in. So Fremantle continues to be very busy. And the tower that you saw on the earlier slide, I believe had a time ball on it. They also did daily time cannon shots as well. With the move to Bickley, they began to revive the public outreach activities by offering public tours of the observatory. This continued until the observatory's research activities were wound down in 2012, and the astronomers were let go. As with the Dunlap Observatory, they did have a group of enthusiastic amateurs who helped support the outreach program during the time at Bickley. And it was the Perth Observatory volunteer group who, very much like we did, signed an agreement with the Western Australia government to actually take over the management of the observatory. And today, they have 3 part-time staff and about 120 volunteers who run a very, very active education program on the site now. I visited there on the 14th of April, and a colleague of mine who works at the University of Western Australia picked me up from my hotel. We had lunch out in the area close to the observatory and then drove up there to meet our hosts at the site. This is the visitor reception and administration building, which is the original 1966 administration building. It's now been turned into a media building as well as administrative center for the observatory. They have a lovely museum with some of the old artifacts and instruments from the early days of the observatory there. They have an extensive library, the technical publications and books and so on from establishment in 1898. They also have a small souvenir shop as well. Out back is a small garden, and this sundial from the original Mount Eliza site is set up, and you can take a look and at the analemma with this sundial. Out beyond is the telescope park, and this is a very extensive area. You can see that they have 7 domes and roll-off buildings there, including that elevated one at the back, which is where the Perth Lowell telescope has to be located. So that's the 24-inch Bowler and Chivens telescope, which is very similar in design to the instrument that's down on the U of T St. George campus on the top of the physics tower. In addition, they have the 13-inch astrograph, a 12.5-inch Newtonian reflector dating from 1919 is in one of the other buildings. The largest instrument they have is a 30-inch Obsession, and they've got a number of other LX200s that are in the moderate aperture range from 30 and 24 inches, plus additional telescopes, 14-inch, 12-inch, 10-inch telescopes, and so on, plus some smaller refractors and Coronado H-alpha scopes. So they're very, very well equipped to deal with a large visitor group. This is the astrograph, which has pretty much all of its original fittings in it and is available for observations as well. In the main building is the original instrument, which is the Transit Circle Meridian. built in 1898, a 6-inch refractor on the meridian wheel. Of course, the idea here is that it moves up and down in azimuth so that you can get to different declinations. And as stars go by, you can mark their passage across the meridian and map them that way. It was refurbished in the 1960s after many decades of hard use, but was never used after the move to Bickley. The Perth Lowell telescope is at the top of this 3-story tower, supported on 4 massive concrete pillars, and then there's a huge concrete pier extending from the bedrock below up to the dome. It does stay steady, and this telescope was originally used for the International Planetary Patrol and is still used for some imaging now. I didn't bother to climb up. It was a hot day, and I wasn't really relishing the thought of putting my knees through that set of steps all the way to the top. But people do get up there to actually use the telescope. It's not a remote access instrument at all. They also have some radio astronomy demonstrated here, and they have an element from one of the major radio telescope systems on display, and it actually is hooked up and collecting data, although since it's only about a 4-meter square array, it doesn't have a great deal of resolution, but it's good to pick up solar activity as well as occasionally some transmissions from Jupiter as well. They have a really impressive display for Aboriginal astronomy. The local Aboriginal population has been around for about 60,000 years, they figure, and the World Wangkini or Sky Stories display is where they put on programs that talk about the Aboriginal cosmology, and the paintings on the inside of the structure were done by a number of local Aboriginal artists as well as art students of Aboriginal descent at a local high school. And this was paid for through the Lottery West Community Grant Program in 2018-2019. The walls are from a telescope dome that was never completed. And so they are semicircular, and these paintings really look lovely in the daytime. The website shows this photograph of it at night, and through the doorway, you can see the red lighting of the entry to the telescope dome, and that was paid for by, I believe it was the Lions International or Kiwanis International Club in Perth. But again, this is very, very well used to teach the public about Aboriginal astronomy. So the tour was about 2 hours, and they were very generous with their time to take me and my driver, Dr. Hoskin, around the place. It turned out that Arthur, the senior volunteer on our tour, had actually visited the Dunlap Observatory. And when he found out that I was coming to visit, he especially asked to take me around, which was really, really nice. And so in addition to talking about the Perth Observatory, Arthur and I were exchanging notes about managing a publicly owned observatory and running a program driven fully by volunteers. So it turned out to be a busman's holiday visit for me in the sense that I was able to have some very, very interesting discussions with him. And I do want to thank both Arthur and Michelle, our hosts, and Matt Woods, the tour administrator, who made the arrangements for me and Dr. Hoskin to the tour. So that in capsule is the Perth Observatory. If you're ever down there, it's a very pleasant drive out into the countryside, and it is well worth the visit. And if you can get in there on one of their public nights to see their programs, and there are many of those, it's well worth the visit. Okay, Thank you very much.